Vipul, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi, Ashu. Great to be connecting with Asia Tech.
Vipul, this is an exciting conversation at many levels, right? EdTech is a sector which has seen phenomenal traction, phenomenal growth in the last few years, right? There's a lot of excitement which we've been seeing in this sector, right? I think COVID has brought in a very different kind of a change, right?
Yes.
We continue to talk of a lot of technology adoption in education industry as a whole. For some reason, it wasn't moving as fast, right? There was a lot of bureaucracy in the system. There were a lot of delays, right? That also meant that the motivation of the founder, couldn't address such exhaustion, right? And many people essentially walked out of this business, right? Very few persisted. We even saw, a phase where there's not a lot of money which is going into, edtech as a whole, right? But COVID has really changed all of that, right? I think COVID has become a boon for edtech businesses, right? And many models have been, kind of emerging, growing, and most importantly, the adoption has been phenomenal, right? And I think through the course of our conversation today, we're going to talk about OrPHICY, right? Where you're doing quite a few interesting things, right? Tracking for a very interesting market, right? You're essentially addressing in the K-12 audience. And you are with OrPHICY, you're trying to build a flipcast methodology of learning and teaching, right? Uh, and I have continued to believe that's a very important format and mechanics of delivering um, you know, for improved learning, right, across the kids. Otherwise they tend to miss out on the context, right? So we're going to talk more about that, Vipul. But before we all of that, we do all of that, right? It's one, good to have you with us. Second, I'd love you to start this with a quick round of introduction about yourself. You're not the first time entrepreneur, right? You've been in the edtech space for a fairly reasonable amount of time. So just a quick round of introduction, and we dive in from there to the opening discussion.
Sure. So I completed my engineering in 2010, and straight after I completed my engineering, I started with my very first venture in education field. That was to prepare students for various competitive exams. That was more aimed at college students. So we used to prepare students for exams like CAD, GMAT, TOEFL, and so on, right? So we started with that venture in 2010 itself. Then came an opportunity where again, we always used to believe that in order to train an Arjun, right, you need to be a Dronacharya, right? So we will also keep giving these exams, keep giving GMAT, keep giving CAT, right? And then it so happened that I also got admission into IIM Calcutta, right? But by that time, we were already well set in our business. So I declined that admission offer and I continued to work in the education sector only, right? So we run a brand, right, called IMS in the state of Gujarat. We have the master franchisee for the entire state of Gujarat, and we have 6 centers where we deliver CAD, GMAT coaching to more than 6,000 students of Gujarat. Right now, it so happened, right, that when pandemic happened, everybody was caught unaware. Right, nobody was prepared to go to an online mode of delivery. Most of us did not even know that there is something called Zoom. Right. So when pandemic happened, the entire teaching fraternity was forced to go online, right? That is where we observed many challenges that the schools and other teachers were facing. And we thought it would be great for us to plug the gaps, right, in the segment. And that is why we started OrPHICY in year 2020. We incorporated the company. We started making content in 2020. We did that for one whole entire year, right? So for one whole entire year, what all that we were doing was shooting videos, making questions, making the pedagogy, right? And in 2021, we launched OrPHICY product, and the past 1 year has been phenomenal for us. We have again been there are very few edtech companies which do 1 crore of revenue in their very first year. We are lucky to be one of those edtech companies, right? And so that's how the journey has been so far.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Vipul. Vipul, right? What I mean, you in a way touched upon OrPHICY, right? What I would love to understand is, why are you cracking for this market, right? Now, when you look at K-12 as a category, right? There are many products, there are many tools, right? And there are umpteen number of players, right? And I think 2020 has been an unreal year, right? Because many players who are inactive in many ways, right? They kind of sprang up, right? And we've
Yes.
had this flurry of edtech companies, right? So we have like hundreds of edtech companies now, which are essentially eyeing and vying for basically the same audience, right? The cost of acquisition has become, just so much more thicker over a period of time. And we're going to talk about the challenges in just a bit, right? But what I would, want to understand is, why are you specifically cutting for this category? That's number one. Number two, the differentiating factors that you bring to the table, right? Because Flipkart, again, as a model, has been there for some time. This is not something which is new in many ways. There have been some global players who've done this. They've come into India. They've tried to build and scale it, right? So I'd love to understand, why did you choose to sort of, for example, start with Flipkart's model, right? And like I said, right, what are the key differentiators that you build in the process?
So one first thing is, whenever one is starting a business, you always have to play to your strength, right?
Right.
So irrespective of what the marketing is, what the market is doing, where the flow of the money is, you have to bank on your strength, right? So for example, right now we are seeing a lot of funding in, let's say, fintech segment, but that is not my strength. I can't get into fintech, right? So our strength has always been education. Our strength has always been teaching students and giving the best quality education. So that is what we wanted to do. Very first thing, right? Secondly, before we launched OrPHICY, right, we did an extensive market study. We did a market study on all the competitors, right, the big and the small ones, right, and we realized two things: that none of them, I would say, have cracked the model, right? Everybody's CAC is very high, right? If you include the behemoths, the unicorns, or you include the smaller players, everybody's struggling with CAC. So nobody has been able to crack that problem, right? So that is one thing that we understood. Second thing is, what we found, that many of the recent startups, which started in 2020 or 21 for that matter, they do not have a viable business model, right? So whenever the music stops, right, they will go extinct, and we are seeing that the dominoes have started falling already. Right? So business models like, right, we'll teach you 1 to 1 or 1 to 5, right? These are very, very, very difficult to sustain, in my opinion, especially Indian market, right? In USA, you can, right, where you are able to charge $120 rupees, $120 per hour or $80 per hour. That is sustainable for, let's say, an Indian player, right? But the Indian student, right, or the Indian community is absolutely spoiled. It is the most spoiled consumer in the entire earth, right? So in India, you will struggle to have a viable business model if your average realization per batch or the per hour commitment of the teacher is not being justified, right? So these were the two main things which gave us confidence that yes, we are still late. We know that we were not the first one to the market, right? But I think it's more important to be the last than to be the first, in my opinion.
Interesting. I like how you've touched upon, the complexities of the Indian market, and I completely agree with what you're saying, Vipul, that it's a fairly complicated market, right? And I think most importantly, the challenging part that I particularly think is very pertinent in India as a market is the ability to pay, right? Or even if there's an ability to pay, there's this constant delay that is there, right? And I think that just makes a lot of these business models unviable in many ways, right? Now, Vipul, for you, right, who's entered the party a little late, right? There are like many challenges that you kind of come across, right? One particular challenge that I would like to discuss in our conversation today, right, is that where there are many large players who've gotten established, right? And I think these are players who've gone on to raise very large rounds of capital, right? Of course, without naming them. And what they've done in the process is they created massive amount of teams, right? And the other thing that they've layered up, with all of this infrastructure that they've created, is to constantly engage with the parent, right? Which essentially means that when you continue to engage with the parent, the possibility of conversion improves over a period of time, right? Yes. Which is not necessarily possible for a lot of newer players, right? Like yourself in the game. There are some other players I've had a chance of speaking, right? They've cut the model completely differently. They've gone B2B first, right? Or their mechanics of dealing in the edtech fraternity has been a B2B2C, right? Where they've involved other stakeholders in the process, right? So in a way, what is happening is it's a war of how you building your business, right? That's kind of emerging, right? Where do you stand on that, right? How difficult is it for you to operate in the environment where, for example, the kind of capital which is being poured in is just overwhelming, right? And like I said, and you kind of also mentioned your point, right? That the CACs are going through the roof. There's little that you can do really about that, right? Because it's the same ecosystem, it's the same number of parents, right, who are adopting to it. The good part is that even tier 2 and tier 3 is now kind of come online, right? So your process of acquiring them is so much more transparent, right? In many ways. What do you do in an environment like that? How are you cutting it? I'd love to understand that, right?
Yes, I completely agree with you. So we have right now players in India, right, whose USP has become cash on their balance sheet, to be honest,
Sure.
right? Uh, so uh, one thing that we realized in the past 1 year of operation is that parent connect is absolutely critical in this
Sure.
segment, right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, right, your customer and consumer are absolutely two different entities, right? The
Right.
consumer is the student, but the
Sure.
customer is actually the parent, who is ultimately the decision maker, who will decide whether to pay the fee or not, right?
Mhm.
So we do understand that parent connect is very, very important. So
Right.
what we did is, right, we thought of directly engaging with the parent only. So
Mhm.
we started a program that is called Super Mom.
Okay.
Jahan pe, again, so as we all know, right, that especially parents in probably tier one, tier two, tier three cities, and sometimes in even in tier one cities, they are not aware of all the tools that are available on the internet, right, for them to train their kids in a better manner, right? And we also understand that it is fundamentally impossible today to cut off a kid from the internet. If we do that, I
Sure.
think we are doing a disservice to the kid only. So we did an awareness campaign, right, where we especially targeted mothers, right, and we trained them how to manage screen time of their child, uh, which
Interesting.
are the which are the which are the websites or tools which are available for free that they can use, right?
Right.
So there are many interesting tools, right? For example, GeoGebra, right? It's a very interesting tool in which a kid can learn a lot about geometry, draw various shapes, and see his work on the screen itself,
Sure.
right? There are many graphing calculators available as well, right? So we taught mothers of all the things that they can use, right? That is one initiative that we launched. Second is we did a lot of awareness campaigns.
Sure.
So we all know that the government has introduced a new education policy, right?
Mhm.
So we again are trying to educate the market regarding what changes NEP is going to bring. So we have already
Interesting.
seen some changes being already being implemented. For example, CBSE had two board exams this year.
Mhm.
The results for the first exams are just out, right? So we are seeing effects of those changes. What are going to be the long-term implications? So we are also educating the parent on that front, that
Right.
how you should make your kid, right, NEP ready. In fact, a lot of schools have approached us that how can they make their school NEP ready as well,
Mhm.
right? So we have a team of experts. We have a team of people who have been even collaborating with certain government bodies as well. So they are well aware of the changes that have been executed, will be implemented over the period of next 2 3 years, because NEP is a long term. It's a
Right.
20-year process, right? The entire policy is going to be implemented over a time frame of 20 years, right?
Mhm.
So these are the two ways in which we have been directly coordinating or connecting with the parent only, right? And secondly, you have to give a lot of evidence before a consumer is convinced to pay, right? Because as we discussed, there are so many choices available, right?
Right.
So, and evidence is very, very important. So, we always, before a kid joins us, it is mandatory for a kid to undergo at least one of our programs. So, we run free courses, right? These are absolutely free courses, either on skill, right? So we have a lot of programs like digital marketing or money management or time management or public speaking, right? So a kid will do one or can do all of the courses as well, right? We also run specific free courses for, let's say, Olympiads, right? A math Olympiad,
Sure.
science Olympiad. So a kid will, first of all, do a free program with us. Secondly,
Mhm.
the kid has to write our onset exam, right? That is
Mhm.
OrPHICY National Skill Evaluation Test, right? So
Mhm.
we don't evaluate just math and science, right? We also consider their decision making, right? Their
Mhm.
ethics, because that again is going to be very, very important when NEP is implemented thoroughly, right?
Right.
After that, we will have a counseling where the presence of a parent is mandatory, right?
Mhm.
So by the virtue of these steps, we are able to build a trust before a kid joins us, right? So
Interesting.
that's how we are tackling the problem of not
Interesting.
immense funds.
But people tell me this, right? In a market which is bombarded with so many options, right? And like I said, I mean, I think both of us agree, right? There's just too much of capital which is flowing into this ecosystem right now, right? It's bizarre, right? In an environment like that, how difficult is it to create, that that visibility for yourself, right? I think what you're mentioning, right, and possibly the process that you're taking, taking the role that you're taking, for example, right, is just a very, very difficult road, right? It's a road which requires a very different kind of a commitment, right? Now, in an environment where you are at or you're almost at war, literally, right? For all the money which
Yes.
is important, it's a very difficult path to sort of sustain, right? That also means because of all of what you're doing, right, and all of these engagements that you're doing, could also mean that this could just limit your focus on what your end goal is. That's one. Second, it could also reduce your pace drastically, right? Because I think everybody else is looking at a very cookie cutter kind of model, right? This is what the product is. This is what the sales process is. Bring the two together, and then you sort of just deliver, right? And scaling becomes so much more easier. Many people have been able to scale that, right? And that's something which has attracted a lot more money than say engagement driven models in education, right? I am not taking it away from you. As a parent, I would love something which engages my kid, right? Engages me in the process. So I am, 100% for a model like that. The problem is for you to reach me, identify me, is a time taking process, right? With the current engagement that you have, right? How are you? I mean, is this a conscious choice that you've taken that we want to go down that route? Or is this something which is going to change shape as you build momentum, right? There are certain things that you're understanding in the process. The product will have a lot more clarity as you scale this. And then, for you to replicate it across other regions, it's going to be so much more easier, right? Because India comes in with its own complexities of, cultural issues, right? Your communication strategy, for example, is going to be different, right? So where are you? Is this an early phase for you where you're just getting all of your things together, thought through deep strategy, where you will be at it across the country, right? And you're willing to commit yourself to the requirements of what where the complexities of that India offers.
Yes. So again, for a startup like ours, right, which has limited capital, right, it is very, very important for us to be judicious, because if we try to
But
grow too fast, too soon, right, the entire existence of the company might be under question, right? So again, we have a very realistic timeline. We are very patient. We don't wish to turn into a unicorn next year. We do wish to,
sure.
but that is not how we plan for it, right? So we know that things tend to take their own sweet time, right? We are not daunted by the competition, because see, in my previous venture as well, right, when we started the previous company, we were just three people, right? We were just three people, and our competitor
Right.
had a team of more than 50 people, right?
Mhm.
But today they don't exist anymore, right? And we have a team of 100 people, right?
Right.
So we know with the right effort, because education, what I have realized is education is one field where you can't cheat the process, right?
Right.
You might get immediate returns, that is possible, right? But if you wish to be sustainable in the long run, you have to deliver, right? You see all the educational institutes around across the globe which have survived for more than 100 years. We talk about Harvard or IIM Ahmedabad or any of the global institutes which exist for more than 100 years, right? All of them are built on credibility and on certain values, right? And our value system is very clear that we will not cheat the process, we will not cheat the kid. The first loyalty has to be towards the kid. So our main focus right now is on delivering amazing product that the kid will love to engage with, right? Our strategy is a bit slow, right? Yes, I do accept that. But then again, that is due to constraint as well, right? I said okay, we are among those very few startups which will do a revenue
Mhm.
of 1 CR, right? Now, this has been done on a marketing budget of 25 lakh, right? So you can just imagine
Right.
how low our CACs are compared to the industry standards, right? That is
Mhm.
because we are trying to reach people on the ground, right? As I said, right, we are trying
Interesting.
to reach mothers, we are trying to reach schools, we are trying to reach a lot of societies as well, right? So in the past
Right.
quarter only, right, January, February, and half of March, we have done 38
Mhm.
uh, activities across various housing societies, right, in which we have covered
Interesting.
more than 4,000 families, right? So
Mhm.
this is our strategy for now, right? Obviously, things are flexible, right? In future, we also might want to go slightly aggressive, right? When we have access to funds. But for now, the entire focus is on surviving what we can say is right now a lull as far as edtech is concerned, right? It's no
Interesting.
longer the hot sector for the investors, right? And even if you see, right, the present giants, right, we need to pay respect to them as well, because they also survived, right? There would have been a phase in their life cycle as well, right, when they were devoid of funds, but they managed to sail through that those difficult times, right? So even a Byju's
Interesting.
or an academy, right, they would have had these phases where they had to struggle. So right now we do understand that this is going to be our struggle phase, which might be rewarded 3 year, 5 year down the line. The important thing is to exist till then, right? We need to see that phase and be in the right
Keep
position.
walking, keep walking. I classically put it that way, that keep walking, right? You
Yes,
will come to that, you will cross that that chasm, right, which exists.
absolutely.
Vipul, another very very important question, right? Now you are tier 2 based, right? You are OrPHICY is a company which is essentially being built in Vadodara, right, in Gujarat,
Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad.
in Ahmedabad, right, in Gujarat, and you're looking to scale this business, um, internationally, right? Now, this is also a trick question, a fun question, right? A combination of them. Now, when you're operating in a tier 2 city, right? Not that Ahmedabad is a tier 2 city. I think Ahmedabad is possibly the most exposed city in many ways. But when you're operating out of a tier 2 city, right? The mechanics of a tier 2 city are very different than a tier 1 city, right? Now, when you're building this model, right? Are you preparing this model? Are you building this model keeping in mind the large opportunity that exists in tier 2, which has been massively underserved, right? Which is now growing aspirationally, which is now wanting to behave exactly like what tier institutions have had, right? And that's only been possible because of COVID, right? Because now the information arbitrage has kind of gone away. Everybody aspirationally, tier 2 and tier 1 markets are essentially almost getting closer, right? I think we just about a few things, few pieces in the process, right? How are you prioritizing that market? Are you still aiming for the tier 1 market first, or are you going tier 2 first in India? Because, like I said, right, that's a massively underserved opportunity, right? Some of the players tried to play that market, but that was very cosmetic. There's little impact that they've been able to create, right? And I still see very limited existence of a lot of these players across these markets. So, given that you're operating out of Ahmedabad, that brings in a very different kind of an understanding, right? That brings you closer to the behavioral tendencies of the people in tier 2 cities, right? Is that a priority that you are solving for first, or you are essentially building for India and a horizontal product, right, which helps you expand very quickly across the board, right? Why do I ask you that question again is in line with CAC, right? Because when you start talking tier A markets, where tier A markets behave completely differently, right? There you need a very large war chest to fight it out in that market, right? A lot of, for example, pieces that you're doing, experiences pieces that you're doing, might not necessarily stand correct in those markets, right? Because people have lesser time. And the geographies are much larger, right? So it could become very cumbersome at that level, right? So I'd love to understand your thought process on growth, right? How are you cutting India from a priority standpoint, with your in line with your expectations of growth?
Yes. So there are two things, right? So we are making the product for entire India, right? So I won't say that our product is tier 2 specific. We are making the product for entire India. Everybody who is studying in any English medium school, right, can enjoy our product, can benefit from our product. As far as the acquisition strategy or the growth strategy is concerned, I concur with what you just alluded to, right? We are focusing on tier 2 for now, right? Tier 2 and tier 3, in fact, as well, right? So if I talk about our user base, right? So if we include Ahmedabad in tier 2, right, then I would say 70% of our enrollments are coming from tier 2, right?
Right.
So Ahmedabad, again, being an Ahmedabad-based company, and we have a very strong network in and around Ahmedabad, a large portion of our students are from Ahmedabad, right? But if I include Ahmedabad in tier 1, in that case, 37% of our students are from tier 2, right? And 28% are from tier 3. So tier 2 and tier 3 is almost 65% of our audience at present, right? So the problem that we are trying to solve, right, is that the excess of great teachers, right? So in tier 2, tier 3 cities, there are areas where great teachers are not available, right?
Sure.
That is less of a problem in tier 1, right? In tier 1, the problem is mainly of accountability, that one day we will try to overcome, right? But our focus, right, is right now not on tier one cities, because first of all, that is, as you said, right, it is very expensive to target tier one cities. Only Mumbai alone will require crores, right, for all the metros.
Right.
And secondly is that students in tier 2, tier 3 cities, as well as their parents, right, they have time for us, right? That is what we have also realized, right? So we do have few students from metros, tier 1 cities as well, right? But again, they are so occupied with their school or extracurricular activities or 5 different tuitions and many other engagements as well, right? That, and even parents are very busy to have a counseling with us, right? Or to engage in a parent teacher meeting, right? They have less
Sure.
time, right? Whereas tier 2, tier 3 students, they do all our free courses, right? They enjoy, right? They get back to us, they give us feedback, right? So in terms of usage as well, right? Tier 2 and tier 3 city students are consuming our product at a far greater rate, right? Their average time for tier 2, tier 3 cities is almost 65 minutes. Whereas for
Interesting.
tier 1 students, that is less than 40 minutes, right? So even on that front, tier 2 and tier 3 cities are giving us a lot better reception. And so that
Interesting.
is where our focus would be for the next year or
Vipul,
so.
interesting. Vipul, another, when you talk of tier two, tier three, right? You have to, I mean, you have no choice but to talk of, the ability to pay, right? Now, when you look at tier one cities, of course, there is the ability to pay is much higher. Tier two typically is very restricted in many ways, right? So till the time you're possibly doing a free product, doing free engagement and all that, that's something which is gonna work, right? But when it comes to say buying slightly expensive products, right? Subscriptions that might not necessarily fly in that market, right? Because, like I said, right, low capitalization base, right, or low savings base, essentially, makes it difficult for a lot of these parents, right? Do you see this as an opportunity? Do you see this as a complication that you have to deal with? What's your sense of it? How are you addressing this? The pricing problem that exists in tier two. I'd love to understand that.
It works both ways, right? I do see it as
Sure.
an opportunity as well, but then we do understand its slight complication as well, right, on certain fronts. So it's an opportunity because this is not a very, I would say, well addressed area of the country, right? So again, tier one again are addressed by all the major players, right? But
Sure.
tier two and tier three is slightly ignored, right? So it's a huge opportunity for us in that regards, right?
Sure.
Secondly, it's a complication because we had to innovate, right? So
Right.
for example, we are one of those very few edtech companies which offers anytime refund to students, right?
Sure.
Because gaining trust of the student community, parent community is very important, right? So if you are not happy at OrPHICY, we give anytime refund. There are no hidden catches, right, or anything, because that is again something, right? The edtech segment of India has spoiled their reputation in that regard, right? That
Right.
um, money thirsty is the reputation of the edtech companies in India, right? So we
Right.
are also trying to change that perspective as well, right? We also offer flexibility to take a, not a bundle of courses, but even let's say there is somebody who wants to pick only science, right? We offer that flexibility as well, right? So our average realization, right, compared to the industry players is not very high, right? We have not seen challenges as far as so parents don't say that your fees is very high, right? That's a challenge that we have not faced till now, right?
Sure.
So our fees is, I would say, slightly higher only for class 10, right? But then again, in class 10, the kind of accountability that we take, nobody else in the country, right, takes that accountability, and that is why parents don't mind paying a slightly higher fee.
Interesting. Vipul, I think we've discussed a lot about, the challenges that you're kind of dealing with, right? Now, there's one unique challenge that I want to talk to you about, right? We've discussed this, right? That you're a company which is based out of Ahmedabad, right? I think one constant problem that I think every business today is kind of facing is the crunch of people, right? And especially when you are in a market like Ahmedabad, right? That crunch is the highest. I mean, I think Gurgaon, for example, or Bangalore or Hyderabad are still better off because the availability of talent is just so much more, right? Especially tech talent, right? And you're an ed tech company, right? Tech is the biggest of all the pain points, right? In the last couple of years.
Yes.
I think, this is not just startups, but I think everybody at every level is kind of talking about, the availability of right quality talent. Because I think business continuity is just becoming most more important, right? The possibility of going wrong is, become so critical in many ways, right? How are you tackling that, right? Because like I said, the expectation of your consumer is just so much more higher. It's swelling by the day. Unless you have people who have the right kind of exposure, right kind of experience, right? It just becomes very, very difficult to sort of tackle all of that, right? What are you doing on that front? Would want you to throw some light, right? Because there are many tier two, there are many businesses and many startups that are based out of tier two cities, right? Who've not necessarily been able to solve this, right? And they have little choice but to relocate themselves. Right?
Yes.
What's been your experience in that front?
I would sort of agree with you, right? That being in a tier two or being in Gujarat, especially it being a dry state, is a challenge in its own, right? So a lot of people hesitate in relocating to Ahmedabad or Gujarat, right? But we are able to counter this problem, right? Simply because we are living in times where you don't have to go to office in order to work, right?
Sure.
So there are companies like Twitter which have given work from home for entire lifetime to their employees, right? Forever, yes. So, for example, our tech lead, right, is based out of New York right now, right? So he's the guy who looks after entire tech, right? He shifts in, he sits in New York, right? We have two members, right, who are doing work from Bangalore, right? So if the tech team is concerned, so most of our sales staff or teachers work from office from Ahmedabad only. But as far as our tech team is concerned, right, so we have a team of 8 people, right, out of which only 2 people sit at Ahmedabad, 6 of them are working remotely, right?
Interesting.
So we have been able to counter this problem simply because of the luxuries that we are living in, right? So yes.
No, I mean, personally, if you ask me, I think we need many more Bangalores, right? I think we need tier twos to come up in a very, very critical way.
Absolutely.
I think as a country, we're fairly large, right? I think that we will not be able to solve for this complexity unless we have many such cities coming up, right? And I think you're setting an example, right? I think this is going to be a motivator for many people, who are based out of there, right? In terms of, I think that priority is very important. And I think tier two offers you a very different kind of luxury, which a tier one cannot, right?
Yes. For example, I'll tell you a luxury that we have, right? So the place that I'm sitting in, right, this is a 5,500 square feet office, and right now there are 52 people working in this office at present, right? We have 52 people, right? Now the rent of this premise, right, is probably 1/10 of what I would get in peak areas in Mumbai, right? So in that regards, tier 2 and tier 3 allows you to build great products because you can spend more on what actually matters rather than spending on infra or rent or other overheads, right? So that's the advantage of being in a tier 2 city. On the other hand, yes, the ecosystem overall is missing, right? So if I am required to talk to a fund house, I have to travel to Mumbai or Bangalore only, right? That ecosystem needs to be established in many more cities and not just Bangalore or Mumbai or NCR for that matter.
But I think it's becoming interesting. I think it's becoming interesting in many ways, right? Vipul, towards the end of our conversation, right? You've been, this has been a very exciting period for you, but it's also been a very challenging period for you, right? It requires a very different kind of a dedication and a commitment, right? But I think given that you've been in the education space, you've continued to believe in the possibility of education and the necessity of education, right? And I think that's something which has worked as a motivation for you to keep going. What are the next 2 years like, right? I'd love to understand that. The markets are kind of coming back. Physical is coming back, right? Schools are going back. Our kids are going back to school, right? There is a huge question mark on the possibility of digital as a whole. What's your sense of it? How are you looking at this? And what are the next 2 years like? I'd love to understand that.
Next 2 years, I believe, are going to be very, very challenging for not just OrPHICY, but for the entire edtech sector in India, right? Because we are all prisoners of the moment, right? So right now, the feeling is that because everything is opening, edtech sector is going to vanish, right? I don't think so that will happen, right? The next 2 years, I believe, will be of consolidation, right? A lot of companies will probably go under the hammer, right? There will be a lot of mergers, lot of acquisitions that will take place, and at the end we will have few very strong companies which will make out in the next 2 years, right? So I believe the next 2 years will be challenging for us, right? And that is where I believe companies which have a very loyal user base, right, will do well, right? And at OrPHICY, we are very lucky that we are very much loved by our student community. Of all the students that we have, right, they have supported us a lot, right? Not just the students, but their parents as well, right? So right now, over the next 2 months, 60% of our enrollments are happening through referrals, right? Not through any digital means, not through any offline activity, but through referrals. Right. So companies with a very strong and loyal user base will survive the next 2 years. But yes, the next 2 years are going to be challenging for education sector. But in the long run, I believe this is a good thing for a startup like us, because right now we are in an ocean of competitors, and I think that will die down, right? The industry will mature in the next 2 years.
Interesting. Vipul, this has been a phenomenal conversation, right? Very cliched, right? I mean, and this is my last one, kind of, question in I think every conversation, right? And I think every founder has something to give from his or her experience. If you were to make that advice suggestion, given that you've chosen to be in a tier two, and I would want this to be more for a lot of entrepreneurs who are who are operating out of tier two cities, right? You've chosen to be in a tier two city. Right? It has its own challenges, but it also has its own benefits, right? If you were to give a suggestion to a lot of tier two entrepreneurs, and say not just tier two, but tier two and downwards, right? Because entrepreneurship is a function of aspiration, and it can happen anywhere. It can happen in villages, it can happen in towns, it can have cities, it can happen in metros, it can happen anywhere, right? And I think we're getting into a phase where I think the opportunity is equal for everybody. If you were to give that advice to anybody who's operating in a tier two, who's choosing to be in a tier two city, what would that advice be? I'd love you to spell that out.
I'll give the same advice that I often give to my students as well, right? Don't bother about things which are not in your control.
Right.
So being in a tier 2, tier 3 cities, certain things are not in your control, right? There is absolutely no need to worry about those things, right? Any entrepreneur, any aspiring entrepreneur should first of all try to understand their consumer, right? Who is at the end of the day going to use your product, right? And then try to make their life as simple as you can, right? I don't think in the long run, right, it will matter a lot where you started from, because things can scale up, right? You might start from a tier 3 city, but eventually you might end up with your headquarter being Bangalore, right?
Interesting.
Yes. Again, possibilities are endless, right? So always stay true to your consumer, stay true to your customer, and try to build products which will simplify their lives.
Interesting. Vipul, on that note, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this amazing conversation, right? That we continue to do at Asia Tech Journal. It was a pleasure to host you. This is an exciting time, right? I think for the country as a whole. But also what is happening is that there's a certain fatigue which is setting into the consumers, right? And that's largely because we've seen massive amount of fundings flowing in very, very quickly. In certain cases, the tendency and the change in the behavior is very, very consistent, right? And that's something which is going to continue for the longest time. EdTech, while it's raised the kind of capital that it has, right, is in a very, very interesting juncture, right? How it pans out over a period of time is going to be very interesting to see, right? Yes. I think the only constant that you can have in the process is to have a low capital, a low capex base. Or a low OPEX base, right? Keep your expenditures in check. And I think that's something that efficiency is going to be very, very critical for the survival of the business, right? Because, once we get into a phase where, offline comes back to normal, and that it will, because there's just too much of money at stake there. And a lot of people who've invested there,
legacy of more than 2,000 years.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be an interesting phase, right? And like I said, right, while you have to continue to maintain your operating efficiency, I think you'll really have to focus hard on your consumer. This is possibly something that you guys are doing in a very, very focused way, right? And that's possibly you're able to do this because of the size where you stand, right? But I think that thesis at a DNA level is just so much more important, right? Even when you scale, you must be in a position to carry that DNA. And I think that's going to be very, very significant. But I think all edtech companies, I think next 2.5 years are going to be very interesting, for all edtech companies. And I kind of concur with what you said, Vipul, right? That we will see the fly-by-night operators getting weeded out. We'll see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. Eventually, it will be a play where just about few very committed and focused players will survive, right? And it will be an interesting phase in many ways. Vipul, thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure to host you, and look forward to having you with us across some of the upcoming panels that we're going to be doing much sooner. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you, Ashu, and I'd like to thank the entire Asia Tech team as well for making this whole event possible. Right, it was my honor to be a representative of OrPHICY today.
Super. Thanks, Vipul. Look forward to having you with us very soon. Thank you.
Bye bye.